Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. On this episode of the podcast, host Craig Jeffery sits down with Joseph Drambarean, Chief Technology Officer at Trovata, to discuss how open banking APIs enhance financial analysis through machine learning-powered search. They share valuable insights on how your organization can break free from the grid by reducing manual workflows through automated data aggregation, so you can focus on strategic analysis that drives value for your business. Listen into the discussion to find out more.
Joseph, welcome to the Treasury Update podcast again.
Hey, Craig, it's great to see you again and always happy to be on the podcast. I'm excited about today's topic.
Before we get into the topic about open banking, APIs, and how machine learning powered search is enhanced by that, maybe you could just give us a quick review of your background and role at Trovata. I'll drop a link in the show notes that links people to the previous podcast, but if you just give us a quick overview, why don't we start with that?
Yeah, of course. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at Trovata, and I've been involved at Trovata really from the beginning of the company. We've been trying to innovate in the space of cash management really for the last 5 years now, and we've taken an approach of using some of the best practices in cloud computing, machine learning, and just a non-traditional approach to data when it comes to cash management. And it's led us down a road of building software and infrastructure for some of the biggest companies in the world, whether we're talking companies like Square or Etsy or Fastly or Sonos or RingCentral, and using technology to drive automation and drive brand new use cases within the realm of forecasting and cash management. So I've been in charge of the technology organization since day one. I really manage the product as well as the infrastructure and technology underpinning that product.
Since we're going to be talking about machine learning powered search, I wanted to start with search and how has search progressed and how that changes us. And I'll give a little bit of a story to start out with. I don't know how old you are, Joseph. I'm not asking you that, but I do remember going to the library where they had these file cards for searching. One was by like title and one was by author. And they were paper copies. You have to look at them and they'd give you the code and you'd hunt through the stacks to find the stuff. That was terrible. It was terrible then, but that was all that existed. So how has search progressed? Maybe in the more modern area of computers, and what is that doing to change how we think and how we act?
I think that's called the Dewey Decimal System, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but yeah, things have come a long way. Ironically, that's actually a very efficient system. The problem is that it's based on humans. Humans are the processing capacity that give you access to information in that system. And really what's happened, obviously, when we talk about search and we think about search, one of the first things that comes to mind is Google search, right? It's our change in behavior of going to google.com and anything that comes on our mind, whether it's looking for a specific thing or trying to find a file or whatever it might be within our life. You can use that one bar, to put in your thoughts in unstructured or structured form, and it'll find what you're looking for, either the answer to a question or a link to a website or a piece of content like an image or a video, whatever it might be. Well, that is actually the result of an evolution that's taken place in computing. And computers have always been really great at finding things. It's actually one of the most basic things that a computer can do within the structure of a file system or within a database. The problem has always been, how can you infer the right types of context to power a search that is actually useful? And that's where the evolution has happened. We had systems like, Alta Vista or Ask Jeeves or Google, all of these, or Yahoo search. We had that at the beginning of the internet, right? And that was the makings of the internet 1.0, if you will. The internet that caused the bubble that brought everything to its knees. And what was missing in that time was this added metadata that makes search so powerful, that makes us so reliant on it today. And the metadata comes from the addition of context that provides clarity into what it is that you're looking for so that the computer can be more efficient in searching the right databases across different indexes to get you your answer. It's the equivalent of having a librarian that is aware of that same Dewey Decimal System, but knows that when you're asking for a work of fiction, that she or he is going to look at a specific index as opposed to putting it all together and going one by one and looking at every single one in that array. And that's really what's changed over the last few decades is we've not only found more efficient ways to index different parts of the internet, but we've added context. We've added metadata that comes from your interaction with the internet, right? So we all are online now. We have online presence. We have calendars that are connected to online profiles. We have itineraries that are connected to online profiles. We have networks. We have folks that are connected to us that are saying things that we are sharing things with. And that nodal relationship across all of these different services and data types and interactions that we have create this metadata sphere, if you will, that when combined and organized in a specific way can create extremely powerful search, which is what happens when we go to Google search. Unbeknownst to us, from the time that we're young, when we go to Google and we just type in our thought, what Google is doing under the hood is using machine learning to try to whittle down that thought into a likely intent, the thing that you're trying to find. And then based on that, put you into the right work stream to find the result of that query in the appropriate database that it's maintaining on its side. So it could be all of the internet crawling that it's been doing, trying to find websites that are applicable. It could be an answer that they've been collecting through Wikipedia and they've been assembling that on their side. It could be a YouTube video that is a perfect match for a thing that you're trying to learn. It could be an email that is within your Gmail, but you just happen to be searching within the Google search bar. And because it's identifying that intent, it knows, oh, you know what? Let me look inside of their email before I surface other results because it knows that the context is close. So that has actually changed our behavior, I'd say, in a pretty fundamental way. Our reliance on search as a culture has driven us to not only be able to discover knowledge more efficiently, but also has created behaviors whereby which we can branch off into different types of knowledge search that is more winsome than if we were trying to collect that information, from the root level. And what I mean by that is there are all kinds of thoughts that emerge in your mind when you can find things easily. Let me give you an example. Let's say that I'm trying to plan a trip to Los Angeles. And it starts with, how do I get to Los Angeles, right? If I find that the best way to get to Los Angeles is to take the 5 and then from there, take the coastal toll road, then it might branch a new thought of saying, well, what are some things to do near the coast, which if I have access to that information quickly, I might find you could actually go to this beach and use it as a stopping point before you continue on your journey to LA. And that might trigger a thought of what are the best restaurants in that coastal town that I just found. And that meandering, that ability to let one thought lead to another, all powered by search that gives me an answer in a low latency way, it creates a completely different type of behavior when it comes to planning, when it comes to problem solving, and also when it comes to just learning in general. And I guess to bring this topic to a useful financial analogy, I guess, this is the type of behavior change that we have found very interesting at Trovata. If you could have a very similar mindset when it comes to traversing financial information, finding things first and foremost. But then once you have found them, having deep understanding of the context of why it matters, the thing that you have found, and how it plays out over history and how it plays out over the future. Would it change your behavior? Would it make you operate in a different way? And could it create the type of mental elasticity that makes you a more strategic thinker within the role of treasury, or within the role of planning, or even at the CFO's office? And this thought of search is kind of the underpinning of all of it, and kind of how we went through this example of starting at the most simple thought of, I need to get to LA, or I need to open an office in Dublin. How would I go about that? Looking at the different streams of costs, the different streams of sales, all of the information that you need to make a well-judged decision on whether or not you can open an office in Dublin. The mechanics by which you arrive to that kind of information, we have found can be closely tied to the same mechanics of search that we've all become so used to when using products like Google or Bing or any other search tool that is available to us. Siri is another example that uses voice-activated search. So that's been really interesting, and I think that this topic is so critical to the transformation of finance generally, because one of the most painstaking aspects of financial analysis is knowing that you're looking at the right information. And of course, that means that you have to get the right information in the first place, process it, make it ready for analysis. And in the process of doing that, you strip out a lot of the opportunity to have those winsome moments, if you will. The ones where you realize, I could stop in Laguna Beach and have a nice afternoon at this restaurant, and it would only really shave off 2 hours from my journey. And that insight could lead to something else. And I feel like that's where the future of financial data transformation lies. It's in this new behavior, this behavior that sits on the shoulders of more strategic thinking, because you have the leverage of finding information and finding insights in a way that was never before possible. And of course, the obvious future, even to that vision, is you don't even have to do any of that thinking. And that's, of course, what Google has done to us, right? The more that we have searched, the more we've input into Google's system, they have enough context to just start to predict, to just start to realize, you're going on a trip to LA? Here's a full itinerary. Here, let me tell you all of the best places to stop. Don't even search. I know what your behavioral characteristics are, and the things that you would like to see given your profile, the interactions you've had in the past, the things that you've searched, the things that you've bought. And it's that kind of thinking that, although creepy at sometimes, it's something that we could have a completely different discussion about. That context drives the necessary assumptions to drive leverage at the point of decision making. And it's a concept that we take very seriously when we think about the journey that a person in finance or within planning or even a CFO is taking, because once we know enough of what you're looking for, the types of analysis that you're doing, the types of search that you're doing, the things that you're worried about, it gives us the footing to start to predict and say, this is where you could be. This is what we see and what you should do about it. And it is, obviously a wave change in behavior.
This search, obviously search continues to learn and get smarter. This context aspect, sometimes you can see it's not sure. It's like, did you mean, did you mean this? And I remember, I'm trying to remember how many years ago it was. It was more than 5 years ago. The phone I had, I was at a hotel going to a client. And what was interesting was my phone buzzed and said, you should leave now to get to your appointment. I never set it up that way. It had the address. It knew when I was supposed to go there. It knew I was traveling by car. And it looked at traffic and said, you need to leave now because there's some delays. And, we need to get you there 15 minutes early. I never set up any of those parameters. And so it made it smarter. And I sort of remember first being shocked and a little bit ticked off that my computer read my calendar and knew where I was. And I was like, that's really useful. But, that idea of context, Joseph, as you talked about, this smarter search, and this idea of metadata. I want to talk about that for just a moment. Part of that I think is when you ask a question, you get smarter when you get the answer. And the less time you spend hunting for stuff, the more you can, I think you use the term winsome, the more it can be a happy experience for figuring these things out. Is this the idea of now I can look at my forecast and now because there's metadata, there's other data associated with it that I can find who's paying me, what type of payment it is, what type of account it goes into. I can learn more, I can explore more, I can self-discover more. Is that what you mean by like it helps with context, which helps me makes it smarter?
Context is such an interesting topic because it has active and passive parts to it. The active parts are, of course, when you're in the moment and you're trying to figure something out. The joy parts of context are you don't have to do that much work because the system is so in tune with your thoughts that it just surfaces the right thing for you. And the example that you gave is a classic home run example of context-driven interactions where calendar, time, traffic equals an incredible moment, right? Creepy, but an incredible moment where it has saved your meeting. It has literally gotten you there on time because it made a recommendation, an insight, right? There are very similar things that can exist within the realm of finance, right? They're very predictable patterns when it comes to cash flow. Things that happen on a cadence basis, whether it's payroll, whether it's disbursements that are related to loans or things of that nature. Those pieces of context that, if unearthed from the DNA of your cash flow, if you will, they become a platform on which we can start to use and base assumptions. And as you're searching, let's say that you're looking for something specifically. Let's say that you're typing in payroll, right? Because we are aware of the cadence intervals of payroll and the specific elements of your cash flow that are your cash flow that line up with payroll, we can start to do intelligent things like group payroll together as a concept. And payroll might be comprised of ADP. It might be comprised of a few other vendors that are used, Gusto, that all roll up to payroll. You think about payroll in one phrase. We know that payroll actually means 8 different line items that all line up to mean payroll to you. And because of that inference, we can turn the analysis of something as it seems simple, payroll, but it is actually complex when looking at it from a financial statement perspective, because to arrive at all of that data, you have to use the right search terms, you have to be looking for the right cadence, and you have to have the original financial statements in the first place from the banks to be able to get that data. So if we are able to wrap that all up into a quick, I just type in PAYR instantly, it suggests, are you looking for payroll? That becomes a moment where not only are you feeling delight actively in that search moment, but you can start to build off of that. Now that you know, I can find things by just typing in PAYR and it knew I was looking for payroll, I wonder what else it can find. And that leads to discovery. That leads to a change of your behavior. Instead of focusing on trying to collate that data just right, getting it ready for the insight that would have been payroll, you're just off to the races and you're starting to do analysis. You're starting to wonder, I wonder what our payroll looked like over the last 90 days. And it could be as simple as tuning the graph to see the last 90 days. And those types of interactions, when you get used to them, just like we got used to search over the last, multiple decades of experience with search, it changes the way that you interact with your computer. In fact, search is not something that I would describe in my day-to-day as a burdensome experience. It's something that is so incredibly, I don't think about it at all. Let's put it that way. We even talk to our phone when we search, right? You hold down your button and you use Google Assistant or Siri and you say, hey, how many points did Steph Curry score last night? And that's actually a complicated search. There are multiple elements to that search. The first thing is, who is Steph Curry? And in the context of points, what are you talking about? Is he an athlete? Is he not? Like all of that. So it works out all of those mechanics by itself. And the simple answer of, well, he scored 28 points last night. That is accurate too, by the way. I think that is a complex answer that's been arrived through context. But you didn't know any of those things. You just wanted to know how many points did he score. The fact that you're used to that you're used to that kind of answer being given to you changes your behavior. And in the context of this example, let's say that I was downstairs and I was talking to a group of friends and we wanted to settle a debate because nobody actually remembers how many points he scored. And you wanted to just say, hey, I can figure that out. Let me ask Siri. And Siri tells you that. Now you are continuing on with your conversation. You can have your argument, right? And it turns into an interaction. In the same vein, let's say that you're sitting in a pressure moment, whether you're in a boardroom setting or you're in a setting where you're meeting with a supervisor, and there are questions around specifics around the cash flow that would take maybe a week to figure out if you had to organize that data, find it, put it together, and present it in a meaningful way. Would your behavior change if you knew in the back of your mind, I can find all of the answers that this supervisor is asking for within seconds by just typing in phrases and things that are coming to mind in the moment? Would you be more fluid in your interactions? Would you be more strategic in your advisory because you knew that you could lean on a system that has context and search built into its foundation? I believe that the answer is yes. You would change your behavior. And now I know that the answer is yes from experience with customers that have told us so. And that's really what we're getting at here, is that if you build a platform that is focused on these types of objectives, what is the result? Where does it take us as a financial industry? Do we make better decisions? Do we make faster decisions? Ultimately, it remains to be seen, I'd say. But the early insight that I have is that it is changing behavior, and it comes down to the foundation of these mechanics. And I think that's why it's so interesting.
A couple things came to mind as you were talking through those. One was that I can't remember. It was like a Saturday Night Live skit about someone saying, how many did Satchel get last night? Satchel Paige has been dead for 40 years or something. It was hilarious about people not having the right context, and the computer was correcting that. But even that's a good example. And this idea of what would it be like if you could get the data you needed served up in the way you wanted. I think that's powerful, because historically it was always hard to get at the data. We were missing things. We're making a lot of assumptions. While I think there still can be some challenges with, do you have all of the data across all of your organization? Are you not making assumptions? It's going to be faster and easier to tell and to check some of these items out, as opposed to saying, I need to build everything from step 1 to step 50. And if there's any change in the question, I got to go back and redo maybe all of those steps, maybe most of those steps. Now I don't have to do that because the structure helps that. But, part of that, Joseph, is the components. Now you've used a bunch of terms like metadata. What's necessary to make this type of environment happen? When I say this type of environment, I think it's part of I think we might need to explain what is this, what's needed, what isn't needed. And there's obviously some elements of, I would assume, search that is necessary for this context. You have to have data stored in a place you can get at, right? It just can't be separate, unsearchable items. And then, you mentioned the term data and metadata, this enriched information that allows you to, whether you call it tagging it or just associating it, this is what provides the context. So what's necessary for this type of search and this type of context to make it work? Because you have to have the components, or the best search engine, if it can't get to data, can't do it.
That's absolutely right. And I love the example that you brought up, because it it's so easy to extrapolate from that example to a real world example in financial transactions. So in yours, you had a meeting that you had to get to. And if we wanted to create an analogy here, the fact that the meeting was taking place at 1234 Acme Street in New York, that was the description of the transaction, if you will. It's the thing that everybody will always have. But that isn't telling us enough to know whether or not you're going to make it there on time, right? That actually doesn't tell you any of that. The fact that you were going to take a car to get there is a really important piece of information. You're not taking a plane, a helicopter. You're not using a jetpack. You're using a traditional mode of transportation, and you're going to take it in a way where you're susceptible to road conditions, right? So an assumption was made there. In the world of financial transactions, I could make an analogy to that of the rail that's being used to process that transaction. Could be a wire, it could be an ACH, it could be a variety of different means. And the context of that rail means something. It could provide detail that is important to the overall transaction that was settled. Now, there are other pieces of information. Time. The fact that you knew that you wanted to be there 15 minutes in advance, right? You knew that that was an important element to the story of being on at that meeting on time. In the calendar invite, the meeting takes place at 10:30 a.m. So just judging by the description of that meeting, you wouldn't know that your preference is to be there early so that maybe you could clear your mind. Maybe you need to use the bathroom before jumping into the meeting. Maybe you need to freshen up, whatever it is that will make you successful in that meeting. That metadata, that context is an important factor in making the declaration that leave now so that I can take into consideration the buffer of traffic and the time that you want in advance, putting that together to be successful when getting to that meeting. That information, if I were to make a loose analogy, the additional context, remittance data, for example, or data coming from a source system, like an ERP system, giving context of this being, for example, a disbursement for a specific vendor or whatever it might be. That context tells us a lot about what the urgency of that payment might have been looking like, why a certain rail was used, why a fee structure was applied to that particular payment versus a different payment. All of that information can be used to discern a picture of almost like the DNA of that transaction, why it took place, where it took place, how often will it take place again? Is this an anomaly? Is it normal? Is this a transaction that should be flagged as fraud? Those are pieces of information that are only surfaced through broader pieces of information coming as a constellation around that core description. Right? Every bank statement will give you the description of this was, a wire of number 071162. And what are you supposed to do with that? That it's great. It was a wire. Thank you. I noted that I made this wire transfer on August 3rd. You need more information to know that that wire was actually a disbursement for an investment that is for a specific company that is in the Philippines, and that company that you're making an investment in the Philippines for, it actually has a tie-in to a forecast item that is principal to the growth forecast for this next 2 quarters. That tight correlation of information is really marrying data that's coming from the bank with human intelligence that's being put into a system, right? And that's the best of every world, right? When you can take different systems, create context that stitches them together, and surface them through powerful search. And that's exactly what Google does. That's what happened with your example. That kind of experience, it takes planning from a technology perspective to execute on that kind of experience. You have to have the right data first and foremost, right? We mentioned it. If we didn't have any one of those elements from your calendar example, we wouldn't have gotten an effective prediction of when we should leave. We needed all of it. And that's why Google and Facebook, and now called Meta, They care so much about every aspect of the contextual model of your day-to-day life. It's because the more they have, the more accurate their prediction and their search will be when you're looking for something or when you're trying to do your next thing. In the same way, when we're trying to make predictions about the outcome of a financial line item or anything related to finance, the more information that we have to establish past, present, and future, the better and more accurate we can be. And the data that we get, a lot of it comes from bank transactions, but a ton of it also comes from human generated metadata. So information like, I know that we want to grow by 2% this quarter, or I am putting in this invoice as a payment and I know that it's going to pay on the 23rd. These are pieces of information that, while yet not fully manifested, not actual transactional record, they are meaningful data points that tell us about where things will go. And therefore, they are related to ultimately a search outcome. If we tie them all together and we find the appropriate associations to them, then we can create these types of experiences. And I think that's what I refer to when I use the word metadata. It's these tangential but extremely relevant elements of information that are nesting ultimately to a transactional record.
So they're associated with it, but they may not be in the original file that came with the first part of the data. So an XML record, the extensible markup language, has an element. That element by itself has no context. What's the header? Or it may say that's the transaction amount. So it tells you that it's the transaction amount. That also comes within a file that tells you the date. It tells you other information. There might be other elements that are associated with that tell you, like you said, payroll or something related to payroll. And now you can build and infer from these other associates and links, just like your brain, all the connections that get built. So you can think it's perhaps the same way with the data. The metadata is how I learn and associate other things with other things that can help the system respond in a way that's contextualized or smart.
Right. And that's a great analogy, because ultimately when we make decisions, when we have thoughts, it's based on a relational graph of information. That one thought might be about a specific thing, but it's influenced by memories, emotions, a variety of other factors that when collected together lead you to that thought. In the same way, all information in its naked form is information without context. But as you attach nodes to it and you form a graph of information that ultimately still has a pivot point, it has a parent that is influencing that graph, the elements of that graph, the nodes that comprise it, all create a more crystallized picture of why it is, what it is, where is it going? And you can use that for inference.
One of the elements about how do we get accurate information? Well, you have to have clean data. How do you have clean data? You have to have clean underlying systems. And that's what people usually say. And that's almost never the case when you look at all the various systems there. It's not standard. It's different. Bank of America is listed as BOA, B of A, Bank of America, BAML, Merrill Lynch. And so you can say, I've got to fix all the underlying data and every underlying source. I don't know that it's not possible. I've just never seen it work. But you can have associative tables or whatever that repair that. And so, hey, all the bad stuff underneath is wrong, but you have a fixed table that, as it learns, it fixes it. And you say, when I say B of A or Bank of America, it knows that it's Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, B of A, however it's stored originally. And this metadata or associative tables helps repair it so you get what you need.
And there's no skipping that hard work. That is something that every major social network company has to deal with, right? If they're pulling data from different subsystems, advertising systems, from mailing campaigns, from apps that you've given access to them to, it's not going to be in a standard format, right? Almost assuredly, it will not be. So there has to be a transformation step to that data ingestion that creates the appropriate naming conventions for some of these things and takes guesses at some of them so that it can be useful at index time and at search time. A very similar thing is something that we do at Trovata and that you can't cut around, right? There will never be a magical company that just says, hey, give us your data. We'll just wink, wink, and it'll work. You actually do have to transform it. You have to make it useful for the purposes of indexing and all of that. So the exact process that you were talking about is exactly what happens. You make assumptions about the fields and how they should be ported over, and you create a unified format, one that takes all of the common denominators from all of the different formats and then uses the rest of the data in an unstructured way to still give you the context that you need to be able to do the search. It's painstaking and it's trial by error for the most part. But once you get at that common model is when the fun starts, is when you have that speed and efficiency of search. And it's something that, of course, we've been investing in for a very long time now. And it's really pivotal to the whole agenda. It's why it's called data transformation.
So Joseph, the beginning of the title of this podcast is called Open Banking APIs Enhance Analysis. How do open APIs help with this process of, super smart contextual search that helps us in finance and treasury?
There's two ways that it will be helpful and that it currently is helpful. I'll start with the currently helpful. APIs are not burdened by the same technological limits that were in place 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when data standards were put into place, taking advantage of limitations to computers in those times, which means that an API-driven data model might have no limits when it comes to characters that are delivered through a single payload of data that is delivered. And as a result of that, the data can be named differently. There can be more data of more context relating to that transaction. And the record itself can be cleaner. And when I mean cleaner, I actually do mean from a human readable perspective. The information can be a long form. It can provide addresses. It can provide PII information that could be useful downstream for reconciliation. It can provide a variety of different attributes that are coming from the source, for example. If it was a batch payment, maybe the originating line item that initiated that batch would make its way into the payment itself. These types of data types, let's say that it arrived at a payload of over 30,000 characters in one record. That wouldn't be a problem, right? Because using standard compression, we can send JSON files up to 15 megabytes in size through a standard RESTful API call, right? So we don't have to worry about how big the data will be when we receive it, meaning that we can provide more data in these formats. Now, of course, the problem is that as the realization has started to matriculate through the industry, everyone has arrived at their own format, right? And while there are dramatically more pieces of metadata that are included in open APIs, now a new problem has been created, which is standardization, which is why that process of transforming that data and making it useful is so important upfront. Now, over time, just like Swift and BAI standards and others created a unified format that banks agreed upon when providing information reporting, the same will happen in open banking APIs. In fact, it already has started to happen in Europe and in Asia. It's already a standardized format when it comes to open banking APIs. In the US, it'll probably take a little bit more time, but it will get there, and it's only a matter of time. That'll be good for everyone. because having a unified format that's metadata rich, that provides information and context that's necessary for machine learning activities and search activities is how data transformation and the future of finance happens. We are in a stage now where we have to use technology to circumvent the drawbacks of different formats. And computers are really good at this. So the good news is that we don't have to worry too much. It's just work that we have to do right now to supplement the eventuality of the format being unified. But it doesn't mean that we can't have the benefits of search today.
That's a good point. I did have a question on the, unified standards or consistent. If everything becomes unified or standardized, there's some benefits of this whole process of transforming the data is faster because it's already done. But don't we want to have more enriched data coming in over time so that we can do more things that we may not have considered now, and in different ways? So is there always going to be this tension of we want to be consistent and have flexibility, or there's always going to be this replacement of better standards with richer data?
That's a great question. I'd take a stab at answering it by saying we create our own problems over time. just like we get used to an idea like search, and search, took a lot of standardization on the internet to arrive to where we are today, to get the benefits of HTML formatting and the way that websites are built so that they could be crawled effectively, and the technology evolution that took place to be able to do that over time as internet standards changed. There was a ton that went into creating the scenario that we have today. And of course, what did we do? We responded by creating a bunch of other metadata, new content, whether it's blogs or texts or tweets or documents or videos or images, whatever you might want to create, we are doing it, right? And adding even more content to the internet in an unstructured way. In the same way, I think that tension will exist within data transformation from a finance perspective. Right now, we're talking about a reality where if you're able to search for things and create ad hoc reports and be able to do analysis in such a seamless way that you're not even thinking twice about it, well, that's going to create a new problem, right? You're going to be creating so many of those things of so many different formats and of so many different types of contexts that we'll need yet another evolution, right? That ties that human generated metadata to the real financial records and creates sense out of all of it and relevancy out of all of it. That kind of tumultuous rolling over of innovation is something that I'm excited about personally, because that's how we get to a better version of what we do, a better version of ourselves even. It's rolling around on top of new plateaus of opportunity. Just like the internet is nowhere near the same the way it was 20 years ago, the same will be true when it comes to financial planning and analysis.
I think we've come up with a better name for this podcast. It would be from winsome search to tumultuous data management or something. Joseph, anything else on the open API front before we head to our closing question?
One of the things that we kind of touched on a little bit, but is really mission critical to the future of the internet, is the notion of privacy and what it means to have access to all of this data. One of the things that I've been keeping a close eye on with regards to open banking standards and the development of banking technology is how the end user has control over the data that they get access to and how they can cut off that access at any point in the future. It's something that we talk a ton about when referring to our own privacy, right? When it comes to our financial information or our health data or our search data or, even our social network data. How that data is still managed by us and controlled by us is a really important aspect of modern computing. I think the same is true with regards to financial data. And as we get better and better at accessing more types of metadata and creating associations of that metadata back to originating records, having fine-grained control over who has access to that is going to be a really important pillar of this innovation, because ultimately it represents the DNA of a company.
That's a really good point. That's the principle of least privilege, right? Who needs to be able to access it? Who can control it? As we wrap up today's podcast, today's discussion, any final thoughts for us?
I think that ultimately, when we talk about search or innovation in the context of data transformation within finance, it's really useful to keep your eye on the prize of why we're doing it, right? It's so easy to get caught up in the different buzzwords that are out there, whether it's machine learning or AI or analysis and all the benefits that you get out of it. But the point of it all, the reason why we're doing it is so that we can be better at our jobs, so that we can be better stewards of the finances that we've been privileged to oversee, or to provide strategic direction in a world of chaos, right? As we lived through COVID and we continue to live through it, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. Technology should be bringing mechanics and experiences that help dilute the effects of that uncertainty. And that's what I try to keep as a North Star as we think about product at Trovata. Is ultimately, it's not just about throwing technology against the wall and seeing what sticks. It's about creating experiences that actually transform the lives of real people, that make their lives better, that make their lives more enjoyable in their day-to-day work. And ultimately, that's how I feel about search. I think I'd be the first to stand on my table and say that my life would be way worse if I didn't have search in it. If I didn't have the ability to find things on a moment's notice on any topic. I feel very strongly that that should be the case within the world of finance, and it's a shame that it isn't.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.